Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming today for our event. So we are Oxford Climate Society, specifically part of the School of Climate Change, which is an 8-week introduction to climate change. So we're very excited to welcome Kate today to speak with us. Just before we start, I'm going to do some brief housekeeping. In the case that there is a fire drill or a fire alarm, your nearest fire exit is out of that door there. Just going to give a short introduction, and we hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. So we're really excited to introduce Kate Raworth as today's guest for this week's School of Climate Change. Kate is a self-described renegade economist. She challenges our obsession with growth, and her manifesto for how we can do things better, Doughnut Economics, was an international bestseller. It's been translated into 20 languages, and her ideas are being practiced all over the world as we speak. Kate is a professor of practice at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, and she's a senior teaching fellow here at Oxford. Before Doughnut Economics, she worked in development, where she co-authored the United Nations Human Development Report, and she worked for 12 years as a senior researcher at Oxford. She's a powerful and much needed force for change, which is ever more welcome given the state of current. So thank you, Kate. We're really excited to have you here today.
That lovely introduction. Hi, it's lovely to be here. Why are we here? I ask myself, why am I here? Why am I here? I'm here because I studied economics at this university in the 1990s, so I'm 55 years old. And I'm here because I'm still protesting against what I was taught, because it's still being taught today, not just in this university, but in universities around the world. So I'm not a climate expert, but I'm here as part of this course, I think, because the economic mindset that we taught, or not taught, but that we just absorb because it's part of the world we all live in, profoundly shapes how we then approach climate change when we come to address it. So I'm going to talk about economics. That's what I studied, and that's what I'm rebelling against. So let me first start by asking, just put up your hand if you've ever studied economics in any form, A-level, O-level. Yeah. Okay, there's lots of people, quite a lot of people in the room study economics. Put up your hand if you think you can't believe you're sitting in a room that's talking about economics. It's like, this is not your thing at all. A couple of people. Oh, no, okay. So the thing about economics is whether or not you've studied it, it studied you. Because the way that our politicians talk, the way that our journalists ask them questions, the way that it's reported in the media, we swim in an economic language. It is like a mother tongue of public policy. And you probably hear, in rooms, people say, oh, well, we need to get some economists on this, as if they will suddenly really solve it and resolve it. Economists are given a very superior position in the ranking of academic advice. And I think we need to challenge that, because the mindsets that we take on shape what we see and what we don't see, what's made central and what's left peripheral, what's visible, what's invisible. So I'm going to start by giving you a degree in economics and undergraduate economics in one slide. So if you never studied it, here it is. I'm going to teach you the core diagrams. And am I, if there are economists at Oxford University economics departments, they might think, well, she's stylizing it, she's straw manning it, maybe a little bit, take it with a pinch of salt. But you know what? This is the core fundamental concepts that are still shaping where we think. It's 2026, people. We are a quarter of the way into the 21st century. We're in it. It's not coming, we're in it. And these are still the ideas that we are sleepwalking our way into this future with. So it's actually the thing that makes me angry is when I sit in on lectures in universities, economics lectures, or students come up to me and they say, I read your book, I got excited, I went to university to study economics, they're teaching us all the stuff you were against. It makes me actually angry in my belly. So that's why I'm here. So economics, what did we learn? Oh,
click.
The system rebels, you see, the system tries to stop change makers. Why is that not working? Everything's frozen. This is telling. It's all frozen now. I love it.
Sorry, everybody, bear with me one moment.
I didn't think AI was going to take over this fast. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the core of the ideas that I think we need to escape from. I'm going to do that in one slide because I'm not interested in just critiquing. The time for that is past. Sometimes the most powerful form of protest is to propose something new. So I put my energy in saying, okay, if not that, then what? Oh, good. So, no, here we go. So I'm going to show you what's wrong. I'm going to spend a lot of time saying, so here's a proposition. It's not the truth. It's not the way, but here's the best that I could manage to put together. I invite others to add. I'm going to show you some of what it looks like in practice when people actually start doing this. And then we can jump into conversation. So 20th century economics, 3 core concepts in diagrams. And I think diagrams are really important because we're taught in universities, especially, to really interrogate words, to contest language. We're not really taught to interrogate images, but they go straight in through our eyes into the visual cortex, which sits in the back of your head, and they can sit there for decades without you realizing they're still shaping your worldview. So I'm going to talk to you in images. So the starting point of economics, well, let me try it. Those of you in the room, what's the first diagram you remember learning in economics?
Guns and butter.
Guns and butter. Wow.
That was like before anybody here was born.
Okay. You were born.
Circular flow with P2C.
Oh, okay. Oh, this room is different. Normally people all go in a little chorus, supply and demand. Oh. We got guns and butter and the circular flow. This is an advanced room.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Supply and demand. So many economics courses begin with, here we are, supply and demand. Let's begin. It's quite a weird thing to do straight away. We put the market on the page. So economics comes from the ancient Greek, economos, the art of household management. Well, we're in a planetary household today. So I think 21st century economics means the art of managing the planetary household in the interest of all its inhabitants. That's a pretty fine art to aspire to. Why would we go on day one? Welcome to economics. Here's the market, right? We put the market at the center of our view. I think that's a political move. And it means that we put price as the metric of concern. So immediately price is the value through which things are expressed. So if you want something to show up in economics, you need to give it some kind of shadow price or price. And anything that falls outside the price contract is called an externality, which I will come back to in a minute. If we jump up a level, we get the circular flow diagram that you just mentioned, right? So this has got the essential market relationship at the heart, the household and the businesses, providing each other with resources, and money goes around and the resources go around. Some things leak out into banks, but they come back into government and into trade. There's a lot of things problematic with this diagram. I'm not going to try and dive into them all. The point is, the economy is presented as self-contained and circular. Things go round and round. That's really problematic. So that's a starting point. The self-portrait of humanity, who we think we are, is a caricature, rational economic man. And he's never actually drawn, so I decided he needed a picture like all things that are influential, so I drew him. He looked a bit like that. He would be a man with no dependents, standing alone, he's got money in his hand, ego in his heart, calculator in his head, nature at his feet. He hates work, he loves luxury, he knows the price of everything, and he can never get enough. And these are the traits that are actually written into the equations that describe humanity in economics models. And yes, behavioral economics deviates away from this, but essentially the models, many of them still come back to this. So this is who we tell ourselves we are. And the really problematic thing is not just how absurd this character is, how narrow he is. The problematic thing is that researchers have found that the more that economics students learn about this character from year 1 to year 2 to year 3 of their studies, the more they value and imitate his traits, the more they say they value self-interest over altruism or competition over collaboration. So who we tell ourselves we are shapes who we become. The models we make of ourselves remake us. And that's really important for any discipline that claims to tell us who we are, because it's performative upon us. I don't think we have a chance of thriving as 8 to 10 billion people on this planet if we continue telling ourselves that this is a model of who we are. It brings out the worst in us. So we need a new character, a new model of humanity. And then the goal of what the economy is for, the shape of progress. If you listen to economists, if you listen to politicians, it's growth, endlessly, measured in GDP, national income. No matter how rich a nation already is, and this is really important, right? Here we are in the UK. On paper, it's one of the richest histories ever in humanity. And yet, you listen to our politicians, particularly in this country, they say, grow, 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 both sides of the house. They will tell us that the solutions to our problems lies in yet more growth without end. And there's got to be something absurd in that. So these are the three foundational concepts that I wanted to start with. And this is what I'm rebelling against. When it comes to environment, by the way, when I was at university in 1990, you couldn't study environmental economics, let alone ecological economics. There was no paper. I had to study a paper called public economics, in which we got to study the case study of what happens if a factory puts gloop in the river, should they put a tax or a quota? And that was my environmental economic education. But let's say that today you can. But let's say, how do we want to show up environmental issues, be it climate change or acid rain or a hole in the ozone layer or the loss of biodiversity, species extinction? How will you make it show up? How do we bring these issues into these diagrams that are formative? Well, if we take this circular flow diagram, it shows up as land. Okay, land, labor, capital, and land. And land is a sort of hold-all for all living things. Notice that it's inside the system. So it's a sort of assets, a resource, capital, wealth inside the economy. So it's a subset. It's kind of weird. And then if you wanted to show up in the supply and demand curve, if you want to say the difference between the private cost and the social cost, imagine you're on your bike and you're sitting behind a car that's pumping, fumes in your face, right? The driver paid for some petrol, but you're getting the impact. So there's a gap between the private cost of petrol and the social cost of petrol is higher. If we want to make that visible here, it's a little red wedge, and it's called an environmental externality. Use the cyclist of breathing in this environmental externality. So this is how, if you want to make the living world visible in mainstream economics, it shows up like this. This was what caused me to fail. It's like, there is no way, I think, we're going to do justice to the living world, to tackling climate change, if when it turns up in our diagrams, it's like that, it's in there. And I'm only half joking. Like, if aliens wanted to take us down, they don't need to land here. They don't need to come with little green laser guns. They merely need to persuade us that this is quite a good way to represent the living world on which all life depends in our economic thinking. Because I think with this, we will take ourselves down. We'll do the job. We're doing the job. So we need to transform. And I think from these kinds of diagrams and these concepts and the foundational thinking that underpins neoclassical economics gave us the beginnings of the 21st century, which began with financial meltdown, with COVID lockdown, with climate and ecological breakdown, and the crackdown against protesters that we see in many, many forms. This doesn't even take us into the rise of authoritarianism and the military war. I mean, I haven't even added that. I can't quite bear to add that to my slides, but we know that that is really pressing and real. And these stories get reported in the news very, very differently, as if they are totally separate, but actually they're profoundly interconnected. They show us how connected we are with each other and the rest of the living world. They show us that people are hit by vast inequalities by crisis. Inequalities of gender, of race, of global north and global south, of wealth and power. But also these crises all arise from systems that try to expand endlessly. Like, if a financial system that endlessly tries to expand, you will induce financial meltdown. You have human systems endlessly pushing into wildlife areas and coupled with ever-increasing global flights and travel, we create perfect conditions for zoonotic disease transfer. If we have industrial systems endlessly mining Earth's fossil fuels and minerals, we will induce climate breakdown and ecological collapse. So these arise from processes of endless expansion. At which point I want to turn to one of the great economic minds of the 20th century that, everybody admires, John Maynard Keynes, the big guy, right? And he said this, I really like this quote from him: economics is the science of thinking in terms of models, joined to the art of choosing models which are relevant to the contemporary world. So two really different things. Should we just carry on getting better and better at thinking in terms of the models we've inherited, or do we stop and say, look at where we are? And actually, it's time to choose models that are actually relevant to these times. Because the diagrams I showed you were designed, many of them, 100 years ago. Not in our times. So what if we start in our times? Another person I want to draw inspiration for, another wonderful dead white man, Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. Don't just fight. Of course we need to fight, but don't just fight. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing one obsolete. So what are you for? Okay, let's know what you're against, but what are you for? What are you going to be propositional about? What are you going to put down instead? What's the alternative that we can turn to? So that really motivated me. So when I was working at Oxfam and I had twin babies, so I'd immersed myself for a year in the gender economy of nappies. And suddenly there was a global financial crisis on the TV, and I'm sitting there with these two babies, and the economists are saying, oh yes, we need to rewrite economics so that it reflects financial realities. And I just remember thinking, I'll be damned if we're only going to rewrite economics for that. Really, in the midst of climate breakdown, in the midst of global inequalities, are we only going to rewrite economics for that? I'd spent decades at Oxfam begging businesses to pay attention to the social and environmental issues we cared about, begging the international institutions, and would often get the sort of, thank you dear, come back when you have a business case. And I was just done with it. So I started reading all the economics I'd never been taught. And I read ecological economics and feminist economics and complexity economics and behavioral economics. And there was so much there that I wanted to bring them together. What if these ideas can dance together on the same page? What would that look like? And that's what led me to start writing a book. So I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour of some of the ideas that I set out. I called it Doughnut Economics. The shape tells you why. I'm going to give you some of the ideas that I set out in that book, drawing on many, many, many thinkers, amazing work over decades. What happens when we try and put them together? And what happens when we try and put them into practice? And I'm going to start by beginning again, by not accepting the concepts that were placed on the screen on day one. So if we begin economics again and say, this is the art of household management, the planetary household in the interest of all her inhabitants, how would we begin? And I'm going to begin with the words of Amartya Sen, who, an Indian economist and philosopher, who says, human development is concerned with advancing the richness of human life rather than the richness of the economy in which human beings live. And he really influenced me when I was a student, because he began with humans. He didn't begin with markets. He began with humans and their capability and their freedom to act in the world. So we can place human development, but human development sits in something much bigger. So I'm going to turn to the scientist Catherine Richardson, who's one of the planetary boundary scientists. She said, humanity can affect the functioning of its own life support systems. There are tipping points we are pushing on. How does this change our definition of progress? And in there, we could have inserted and a love and care for the more than human world, not just the tipping points of the systems we depend upon, but that all living beings depend upon. What kind of world would we create? What kind of economy would we aspire to? What would success look like if we took that seriously? So taking these two together, I drew a donut. Let me introduce this. Think of it as a compass, right? So we're saying, what's the goal? What are we here for? Like, if we don't know what we're here for and what we're trying to achieve, how on earth do we know what any policy looks like if it's successful or not? So here's one possible way of setting a goal. If you think of humanity's use of Earth's resources radiating out from the center of that image, then the hole in the middle of the donut is a place where people are left falling short on the essentials of life. It's where people do not have the resources that every person has a claim to meet their fundamental needs. And these I'm drawing on from the Sustainable Development Goals, because all the governments have already agreed that every person in the world has a right to meet these. So you've got strong international recognition. Leave nobody in the hole falling short on the essentials of life for food and water and healthcare and education and housing, income and voice. So leave no one in the hole, get everybody over that social foundation into the green ring of the donut, where we meet the needs of all people. But, and this is a very 21st century but, we must simultaneously make sure we don't go over that ecological ceiling beyond, because there we start putting so much pressure on the life support systems of this unique and delicately balanced living planet that we begin to kick her out of balance. And these come from the 9 planetary boundaries that may already have been raised in this course. And the planetary boundaries first recognized and drawn up by scientists in 2009, they said, we believe these are the critical life-supporting systems that together regulate the Earth and hold it in the era that's been known as the Holocene, the last 10 to 12,000 years, in which we've had a stable climate and fertile soil and protective ozone layer overhead, It's been a Garden of Eden for humanity. It's been the place in which all civilizations have been created and thrived. We would be crazy to kick ourselves beyond that. We'd be crazy. So the goal of the donut is to meet the needs of all people within the needs of the living planet. Leave nobody in the hole, but don't overshoot Earth's limits. And so the shape of progress is not this endless growth of GDP. It's totally inadequate. It's the wrong metric and it's the wrong shape. The shape of progress is like this. Balance. Just do that with your hands. Feel it. Yeah. Right? You look lovely. Right? And it's our heartbeat. We know this in our bodies. It's like balance. Our bodies are continually balancing us. We're all the same temperature. It's incredible. Our bodies are brilliant at balance. Enough food, enough water, enough temperature, enough oxygen, but not too much of any of them. That's what keeps us alive. We live in health because we're in balance. Take what we deeply understand and know in the human body and take it to the planetary body. We need to find balance. That, moving towards balance, will be progress. So when I first drew the donut, and in 2012, we published it at Oxfam, a little discussion paper, just a little thing, and it had massive traction. It took off. People started saying, oh, you're the donut lady. What the hell have I done? But I really wondered, why is this taken off? Why is this image having traction? If we just wrote those words in a list, people would barely blink. So I started looking at how other cultures around the world have depicted health and well-being and thriving and balance. And I was just blown away to see that time and time again, ancient cultures have used this dynamic circle. You recognize these, a dynamic. There's something that humans deeply know. There's a dynamism that's held, and that is good. So the donut was unconsciously tapping into something that other cultures have long known. And then when I drew, oh, this is the Western conception of success. It's an extraordinary outlier. So now I've come to think of the donut as, can it act as a bridge for those of us raised on this Western mindset? I place myself squarely in that camp. Can it act as a bridge back towards a wisdom that has long been held in other cultures? Can it act as a bridge in the other direction for people with a totally different cultural mindset and worldview to converse with those of us from the West whose way of thinking may seem outstandingly weird? Can the donut help us bridge across that? So if balance is where we want to be, this is where we are. And this is why we're here. We are way outside the donut right now. And this is an update that was published in Nature last October, which is really valuable for us, of course, to have it published. The journal Nature published it, giving recognition to this is a very credible way of measuring what matters right now at this point in the 21st century. So you can see that billions of people are falling short of the essentials of life. All that red going into the middle is the extent to which people are falling short on life's essentials. Some of them measured with one indicator, some with two. That's why you see a little stepped, right? Some one or two indicators. We want to eliminate all the red so that there's no percentage of the human population that's falling short on life's essentials. But we have to do that by coming back within these planetary boundaries at the same time. We are way overshooting 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries. So when I look at this, and this isn't easy to look at, but you're all here, so you know this is the way of the world. When I look at this, I just think, last century's economists didn't see this. They didn't see this double whammy problem. So why on earth would we think that their theories would help us solve it? Last century's governments and their policies and their fiscal and macroeconomic policies were not designed to solve this. They were just designed to grow. So why would we think that policy as usual will solve this? Last century's companies, the corporations, were not designed to do business in a world of this reality. Why would we think that they would be part of the answer? It is a time for redesign, deep redesign. And for some people, that's just utterly overwhelming. And other people, it's the biggest exciting opportunity to say, I want to be part of that redesign. It's time. And we start from this knowledge. What are we going to do from here? How are we going to live? How are we going to run our countries? How are we going to run businesses and design businesses? And what am I going to be as an activist or a community member? How am I going to eat and travel and invest and divest and protest and volunteer? And how am I going to show up, given that this is the reality I'm part of? And we see this, not this one diagram, but we see it in the headlines all the time. It's what's bringing many of you here, right? And I'm not going to read out these headlines. They're familiar. It can be too familiar. We can become inured to them. It can be hard to read them. because we see them again and again. Which country had a hurricane last week? Where's been flooded now? It just keeps happening. The stat, richest 1% of people own half the world's wealth. Blown away. Okay, let me give you one good news, right? My favorite one, NASA, hole in Earth's ozone layer finally closing up because humans did something about it. Great headline. And we can do something about all of this, which is why we're all here. We can do something about all of this. It's going to take a lot. So I'm showing you the challenge at the global scale, right? And most of these problems happen at much closer to home, and also countries have huge differences in responsibility. So let's go down a layer. So these are national donuts created by my colleague Andrew Fanning and some other researchers when they were working together at Leeds University. There's a database of 150 of these. If you want to look them up, there's the website goodlife.leeds.ac.uk. You can look up any country that you care about. So you can see here Malawi on one end, massive human shortfall, not overshooting any of their share of planetary boundaries. We've got India and China, both with a double whammy challenge of human shortfall and some ecological overshoot. And then you've got the US on a much higher income per person, massive ecological overshoot, and still inequality, that red there, that's the inequality which shows up as poverty around the country. So countries in very, very different positions. And let me just be clear that if you're looking at those red wedges and that climate wedge coming off the US at the CO2 emissions at the top, you're asking yourself, is that a production or consumption basis? It's a consumption basis. So these national donuts are calculated on a consumption basis. All of the ecological overshoot is the consumption. So let's just look at this room. The lights and the projectors and the carpets and the chairs and the wood and the clothes we're wearing. This was not made in the UK. It's all probably imported. So we would be taking into account all the materials and the energy that's imported to make this possible in this room. So that's consumption basis calculation. So let's go from these four into a scatter plot of 50, just the selection of the 150. So the place that I believe every country should be aiming to be is in that top left-hand corner, right, up there, that little donut. Because that is where countries, they rise up to meet the needs of all people. So as you rise up this chart, it means you're eliminating human shortfall. If you're right at the top, it means no people in UN internationally comparable data sets are falling below the minimum foundation. But you do it coming back within planetary boundaries. So as you come back this way, you eliminate that red overshoot. You can see it's very big out here, and they come back, right? So you rise up to meet people's needs, and you come back within the needs of the planet. So every country, if it's going to meet the needs of all of its people within the needs of the donut, with the planet, it's going to be in that top left-hand corner. And here are the countries I just showed you, and I added the UK because that's where we are. Okay? So they're scattered across this array. And so several things come from here. One, there's not a country that's already in the donut. There's no country that's already living there. Costa Rica is closer than any other. For some countries, this is a real jaw drop moment. I've seen sort of ambassadors and senior policymakers from Sweden and Norway and places that probably have thought they were in the middle. They can't believe that their country is so far from being inside the donut. It's a real re-reckoning of who's doing well in the world compared to ranking by GDP. This scatter plot, I invite you to stop yourself next time you find yourself or anybody else talking about developed countries. Because I ask you, where's a developed country? Is there one? I don't see any developed countries here. There's no country here that should be calling itself developed. There's absolutely nothing developed about overshooting planetary boundaries, undermining the life support systems of the planet, and undermining the opportunities and possibilities for today's low-income countries. I also want to note that although countries appear separate, like they're on their own little journey, they are, of course, profoundly interconnected through histories of colonialism. Let's start there since we're in the UK. But also through military and corporate power today, which nobody can miss, through trade and finance rules, through resource extraction, through the current and future impacts of climate change. So we're profoundly interconnected, and all of these countries' journeys will shape each other's. The history of going for growth, pursuing GDP growth, generally takes countries in this direction. First, they rise up, and think what it would mean for a country like Malawi to double its national income, to double its income per capita. Can be massive gains in child survival, maternal health, in nutrition, in access to energy, access to transport, education, healthcare, livelihood opportunities can be massive boon, which is why you can see actually a lot of countries go up. But as countries increase their income, instead of going straight up into the donut, you can see the history of it is that countries tend to go straight past it and turn that additional income into ecological overshoot, many of them failing to reach the needs of all of their people. So going for growth doesn't take us to the donut. And in fact, we can look and see this is the trajectory between 1992 and 2015 of countries going these little grey worms. This is actually the direction the countries went. And you can see even the countries that are close to the donut are not heading towards it, they're heading kind of scooping past it. So here I turn to the words of Donella Meadows, one of the mothers of systems thinking, one of the authors of the Club of Rome report in the early 1970s. And she said, when anyone calls for growth of anything, just say growth of what? And why? And for whom? And who pays the cost? And how long can it last? And what's the cost of the planet? And how much is enough? We can come back to this question about growth. It's so deeply embedded in the Western mindset as growth is good. We can come back to it. But I love these questions from Donella Meadows. You can ask them in any country, anywhere, at any time. So, if we don't want to go past the donut, where do we want to go? I believe the direction that we want is to see here low-income countries. We've got here Uganda, Tanzania, Malawi, Nigeria, Mali, Senegal, Cameroon, India, halfway up there. How could these nations, from now, how could these nations rise up to meet the needs of all of their people without overshooting planetary boundaries in the way that almost every country before them has done? This is a major critical question for the world and a huge possibility. How can they leapfrog technologies that just mire you in fossil fuel addiction? What would it look like for that to happen? How could middle-income countries, and I'm talking here about China, Peru, Turkey, Russia, Iran, Mexico, Bolivia, many others, how could they both rise up to meet the needs of their people, because there's a lot of human shortfall there, but do that while already coming back within planetary boundaries? This too is an unprecedented pathway. And these are countries that they're in the middle of massive electrification or expansion of housing, of roads, of major rolling out of major infrastructural projects. Which way are those projects taking? And then these high-income countries, like where we are today, but all high-income countries, massively reduce that very, very visible red ecological overshoot. So massively come back within the means of the planet. That too is an unprecedented pathway. So all countries here are on unprecedented pathways if we're aiming for this thriving, which I think creates a shared sense of both ambition and humility. And we're going to be learning from each other in unexpected directions. But it also calls for a huge rebalancing between nations. As I said, these pathways are interdependent. So there's a rebalancing needed between countries, and you can bring your vision and ethic of that rebalancing. It might be reparations or return of stolen land, or redistribution of wealth and technology, or the renegotiation of trade and finance rules, or the rebalancing of global institutional power, or all of it. So I'm going to stop here because for me, this is like a top level map of directionality that the world needs. And when I listen from my local politics to global geopolitics, I'm asking myself, is what's happening now taking us towards this or further away from this? I'm going to stop here and I'm going to invite you to talk to the person or two people next to you for 4 minutes. What are you seeing here? And then when we come back, I'm going to invite somebody who identifies with what I'm going to call the Rise Nations, just to say something about what you're seeing here, what that looks like. Somebody from a Reorient cluster, if there's somebody here who identifies with us, and somebody from the Reduced Nations. I just want to hear a view, one view from a person across the room. What are you seeing here? Okay, so you've got 4 minutes. Off you go. Great, thank you. Okay, so I would love to hear from somebody who identifies with what I call here the Rise Nations. Just a view of what's coming up for you when you see this. Anybody? Yes, please.
Well, I'm from like India, but I've been basically living in many different countries. I kind of live in a different country every 2, 3, 4 years. But what I would say is like the biggest like challenge or thing that needs to be solved in I would say India is definitely like inequality, but then policy that works for the people. Because I think there's like definitely like people do want to, no one wants to like not meet minimum social boundaries. Like everyone wants to have like a good standard of living, like be able to do things that are functioning for society. But I think it's like when you start growing and it's only like concentrating in a few individuals, that's where the problem, and then you start going this way in terms of growth. But I think if you like cut down on like only a singular number of people getting that sort of growth, then helps us turn left sort of thing.
Actually, you go straight for the inequality is going to make all the difference as to how that additional income is translated into ecological ownership or actually meeting people's needs. Thank you. Great point. Okay. Somebody from the cluster that I've called reorient nations. Anybody identify with those countries? You're born there, you live there, spend time there? Yes, please.
I can talk. I'm from Brazil. So historically, we should not be held accountable for the emissions. But nowadays, we are on the top 10 emitters of the world. So we obviously have to reorient. We are also home to, I believe everyone in the room knows, to the biggest rainforest in the world, which is the Amazon. And we have so many other natural resources. And we are the second country in the world that hosts the most amount of critical minerals. So our strategy to reorient is very much linked to the strategy that the reduce or in the most developed countries, it's very linked to the both of them because we need them to be held accountable for their historical contributions and to be able to pay in a very literal way to the quantified goal that they have agreed to in other commitments. Because our way to reorient is, for instance, the main part of our emissions come from land use. To make the forest standing, we have to be able to find a way to make that financially stable. And that can't come from the government domestically. And we can't be asked again to sacrifice our development or the money that would come from these natural resources, which includes fossil fuels, in detriment of the world, because we have been exploited until now. So our politicians will not take that, and that will make this process much harder. So the climate finance, from my point of view and where I come from, is the key here to be able to have the orientation that we need at the moment.
Thank you. So a very strong argument that the rebalance is a very important part of the direction that Brazil and others could take, right? So you're calling on international finance to make it possible to go in a different direction. So that leads us very nicely to somebody want to speak from the reduced nations, whether it's speaking for yourself or for like what you think the national story is. If there's anyone who's from the US, Canada, Australia, what does it look like from there? Or indeed any. Yes, please.
From the United States. And just pointing out a big obstacle I've seen to sort of reduce at home, and that the things that can help, the list by the era, just elicit such visceral reactions in people who aren't actually the people who are being called on to step up. It's, a common example is, billionaires should pay more taxes, contribute to society a bit more. And sort of the public, or large parts of it, will leap to their defense, even though it's actually something that's for their benefit. But this way in which that argument has been polarized in the States is a huge obstacle to that. I just think it's remarkable how resilient that mindset is.
That's a powerful point. And sometimes people from the US or say, but our freedom is not up for negotiation, right? It's framed as a freedom, which I'm hearing you say the other way around, which is the visceral reaction against anything that threatens that national self-determination. Yeah, thank you. So this isn't going to be easy, is it, right? I mean, hearing these different national stories, and thank you to the three of you for sharing those. We could just sit with this for the rest of the time, right? There's a lot of politics we could unpick in it. I'm going to keep moving. Yeah, you're welcome to come back to this slide. You can have all these slides. I'm going to keep moving because I'm here as an economist. I'm here as an economic rebel. So my question that when I look at this, I think, okay, here we are in 2026. There are students coming to universities all over the world wanting to learn economics, the mother tongue of public policy, and many of them want to help turn the world into this direction. So what would be the economic mindset that would give them even half a chance of doing this? What would equip them? Because I believe that what they're being taught at the moment does not equip them for this. That's what I want to be propositional about. So here I'm going to go into it. What kind of thinking would you bring if you were saying, folks, I want to equip you to be the policymakers of the future? So I'm going to dive in. I would not begin with supply and demand. I begin with this diagram. I call it the embedded economy diagram. Let's start with the big picture. Let's start with everything. Okay, let's start with the whole thing. So what's going on here? This is a diagram that says the economy is a subset of society. It is a social construct, and it's embedded in our political and our legal and our ethical and spiritual and cultural institutions. It's a total human creation. The beauty of that is we can recreate it, we can remake it. And human society is a subset of the rest of the living world. We are part of nature, embedded in the web of life, utterly dependent upon it, utterly dependent upon the stability and the health of the rest of the living world for our health and well-being. So having economy and society in the living world is the sort of 101 move of ecological economics. When you see this diagram, we're in the presence of ecological economics. Do you remember, this is not the first diagram I showed you where the nature was a kind of natural asset, land, inside the economy. This is flipped. The economy is inside the living world. And that's the difference between environmental economics, where nature is an asset, and ecological economics, where the economy is a subset of life, and life is the big system, and we measure things actually in life systems. You can see that there are materials and matter drawn in and waste and pollution put out. So we've got an open subsystem. And it's bathed in a flow of energy, right? The sun. We've got the sun here. The sun is bringing energy all the time, and we've got waste heat going out. So it's subject to the second law of thermodynamics. So we're putting a much more material and energetic reality first, because this world is deeply material and energetic. And then let's zoom inside. Let's look inside the economy. inside the economy, I've got these kind of 4 fundamental ways of provisioning for our needs and wants. So we've got, first of all, the market, which is a place of private goods and services produced and sold through price-based exchange. Incredibly powerful. No wonder Adam Smith extols its virtues. Also, got some problems, right? Markets they serve those who can pay and the rest they ignore. And they value what's priced and the rest they exploit. That's a pretty big problem. So you don't want to be in an economy that's run by markets alone. So often we say, well, we're running in the state. We can have public goods and services produced by the state for the resident population. Raising taxes, providing for all. There are issues there of accountability and representation. But economists in the 20th century, I think, got caught in a ideological boxing match between these two, the market and the state. Are you for laissez-faire free market capitalism or state-loving socialism? Choose. And that boxing match meant that they lost sight of 2 other fundamental forms of provisioning for our needs and wants. There's the household, where we begin every day, unless we're a student, in which case we're living in rooms, right? And there's a funny thing that when you're a student, you're taking out the household. You might forget to think how fundamental it is. I tell you, when you become a parent, you will remember. The cooking, washing, cleaning, sweeping, raising the kids, doing it all again tomorrow. Right? The parents in the room are laughing with me. The reproductive economy that makes things work. It's essential. It's heavy work. It's been traditionally done by women, but it's essential to our well-being, our care. And you live it yourselves in your 15 halls between the care of friends, or when you live in a house together. Oh, who's doing the washing up? Right? It all becomes the politics of the household. It doesn't go away. But then also the commons, where we come together as communities. Not through the market or the state, but as a community. I think this society is a commons, right? There are rules about you can join, but there are rules about how you behave, and it's a community that you create. Wikipedia is a beautiful example of a commons, or a neighborhood garden on the corner of your block. Or the atmosphere is a global commons. We just treat it really badly. So commons. So for me, these are 4 fundamental forms of provisioning. We should all be very aware of them, because that we can choose how we provision for our needs and wants in many, many different ways. And let's recognize that the state plays an additional, very important role as economic regulator. It sets the rules and policies that help regulate the balance between these. Let's think about the market and the household. I think in countries like Denmark, if you have a child, both parents can share a year of parental leave between them. In the US, I believe if a woman has a child, I think she still gets like 6 weeks leave and then you're back to work. So the state regulates very differently to protect the household from the demands of the market. It matters. We know these relationships because actually we're all involved in them, right? And think about your own roles in them. In the market, you may be a consumer or producer. We buy stuff, we sell stuff. In the production, you might be a laborer or a capital owner, right? You might be getting wages or the profits. And as Karl Marx would tell us, the difference really matters. Or you may be excluded from markets and destitute, with no money and unable to buy anything through a market. In relation to the state, you may be a resident or a public servant, a voter, a protester, or you may be stateless and not recognized by any state. In relation to the household, a parent, a child, a partner, a relative, or kinless and without a family. And in relation to the commons, a commoner, a steward, a co-creator, a volunteer, or excluded. And you could just take your own life and plot what you've done today. You may have bought something through the market. You're benefiting from the state, from the commons. We know how to behave in these different spaces. We know the difference between the commons and the market. If I invited you over for supper and you had a meal with me and you said, how much do I owe you? I'd be offended. This is our market, right? I invited you into my household. So we know the different behavioral rules. And I think it's really valuable just to see it and say, oh yeah, we're part of this. And then also in financial markets, you may be a creditor, a debtor, an investor, speculator, or financially excluded. So we can each map our own lives on here and think about the roles and relations we have. Rational economic man is tended to be imagined over in this market and finance space, but actually even in the best markets and spaces, people don't behave like that. And we know that we are a much richer we, the pro-social, we, the social, right? We are reciprocators. We punish each other for breaking the rules or taking advantage of the group. So we are the most pro-social of all mammals. We're better than even the naked mole rat, which is the most pro-social mammals, but only with its next of kin. We are pro-social with each other. Look at this. We've never met before, and we're here nice to each other in a room, and we'll hold the door open and chat. We are the most social mammal. We have to take advantage of our sociability and write that into our understanding of who we can be. But let's go back to the market, state, household, and commons. Let's just recognize that all 4 of them can be ways in which people produce food. People do produce food through all 4 of these organizational forms. people produce energy, right? And this is the beauty of the energy revolution, that in the 20th century, because energy was either a massive oil rig or a coal mine, you had to be a major corporation or a state to have the resources to own one. But now, because we've got wind turbines or solar panels and it's come down to a much smaller scale, it can be owned by a household or by a community. So it's politically transformative about who has the capacity to generate energy, who has the power to own that. What really matters, though, is that most of the interesting stuff that happens is the intersection between the two, the market and the household. You can have solar microgrids and prosumers, or the household and the state, or the commons and the state. You can have public commons partnership, community land trusts, or open source software between the market and the commons. So all sorts of really interesting design forms happen at the intersection of these. And if we are not aware of the household and the commons, and we're just going through our economic mindset with the market and the state, we are missing some of the most interesting, innovative spaces of economic redesign that are happening in society now. Right, I've given you a compass in the form of the donut, and I've given you a potential map in form of the embedded economy. Now I'm going to dive in and say, what are the dynamics that I believe we need to do that rise, reorient, and reduce? What are the dynamics? It's not just grow, grow, grow. That was taking us straight past where we want to go. There are two dynamics that I think we need to put at the center of our vision as 21st century economists if we want to turn this story around. And the first is to recognize that we've inherited deeply degenerative industrial systems. We take Earth's materials, make them into stuff we want, use it for a while and throw it away. And it's linear, and it eats the sources of our own sustenance, right? We're consuming the earth on which we depend. We have to get away from that, pushing us over planetary boundaries into a circular or cyclical or regenerative design, where resources aren't used up, they're used again and again. You can't throw things away, there is no away. So we need to reuse and reduce and recycle and repair and refurbish, separating biological materials and technical materials, meaning those that won't decompose if you bury them in the soil because they've been transformed. Plastics, for example. We need to transform the way we use them. And this goes up the design stream about how we make things. Just a few examples towards regenerative urban design from the urban space. So whether it's here in eco-construction using only locally available materials. So literally when that house and those materials are no longer serviceable, they will literally return to the earth because they were bio-based materials. Or circular construction in Amsterdam. This is a district of the city in which only buildings that are allowed to be constructed have to be made with materials that have a material passport, that are reused or reusable, and that can be, the buildings are kind of clicked and bolted together rather than glued and cemented together. So trialing circular design. Retrofit and renovation in Baltimore, as they often say, the best building is one that already exists. So don't knock it down. What do you do with what you've already got? And this, I think, is particularly pertinent in very high-income countries that have already taken materials from the world and got so much stuff, make use of it rather than taking more. And then here, looking at sponge cities, so cities that are embedded in ecosystems that are going to flood. So how do you design to receive that flooding rather than be hit by flash flooding and have the city upturned by it? Those are just some possible examples. We could have myriad examples of circular or regenerative design, but I'm just bringing a few from urban redesign ideas. So from degenerative to regenerative futures, but also going back to the point that was made by our friend from India. We've inherited economies that are deeply divisive, that capture value and opportunity in the hands of a few, whether that is by regulation, by what Katerina Pistol would call the coding of capital, whether it's by privilege, inheritance, infrastructure, the reinforcing feedback that wealth begets wealth, that power begets power. You just see inequalities open up, and we need to create economy. I mean, I think we've got no chance of getting into the donut in a world in which 1% of the world owns half the world's wealth. That's global, but we see it rising nationally as well, a widening between the 99 and the 1%. No chance. For all the reasons that you said about seeing this in India, the increased income doesn't go to the ones who most need it, it goes to the ones who've already got. So we need to create economies that are far more distributed by design, that share value and opportunity with all who co-create it, far more equitably. And again, just a few examples of what that could look like. Again, I'm turning to urban design as just one subsection. So in Chile, the architect Alejandro Aravena realized that many, many people would never be able to buy a house. See that picture up there? But he knew that they had enough money to buy half a house. So he designed half houses that had all the water and electricity and plumbing that you needed. You could buy your half house, and then when you had enough money, you could fill it in. And by just designing a house differently, he opened up the possibility of home ownership rather than renting forever to a huge swathe of population, right? Just designing a house differently. Here in Bangkok, a previous housing area that was seen as slums was actually redeveloped with the community. What do you want? How do you want this to be? So a very different way of upgrading the city. Rapid transit, I love this in Curitiba. Like, why this city especially, you get the bus, you just sit in the traffic. You are the traffic with all the cars, except for the new bus lanes. Curitiba, right? They built the buses to be the fastest, the cheapest. It makes sense. This is how public transport should be. So those who work furthest from the city get into the city fast. And then here in Cleveland, when we're bringing in new skills, the high skills of solar panels and renewable energy, who's going to get those jobs? And they intentionally reached out to historically marginalized communities to bring them to the heart of this new sector so that they are benefiting from the skills and the opportunity. So again, just 4 possible ways you could create a far more distributed economy, but there are many, 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 many more. It's a design pattern. So I encourage you to think of going from degenerative to regenerative, from divisive to distributive. So for me, regenerative and distributive design, looking for that pattern in the world, bringing it about, how can we economically make it possible? Because that will take us towards the donut. So talking about patterns, let me pull right back and talk about, well, what does this mean for GDP growth? To put it very simply, we've inherited economies that need to grow, whether or not that makes us thrive. And what I hope I've shown through that scatter plot is that economies that grow and need to grow endlessly does not take us into the donut. It takes us straight past that. What we need are economies that enable us to thrive, whether or not they grow. And that means overcoming the structural dependency upon endless growth that's been written into our economic design. It's been written in financially, politically, and socially. And if you want, I can come back and talk more about this. I didn't know how long these slides were taking to take. So I'm going to come back and talk more about this if you want. If somebody wants to bring it up, I'll dive in and show you how I believe we're structurally dependent upon endless growth at the moment and what it would take to overcome that. And I'm talking particularly about high-income countries. So coming back here, this is the direction we want to go. If we have a map that recognizes the economy as a subset of society, a subset of the living world, then we want to create economies that are far more distributed by design, then as they rise up, that income will help meet the needs of all people, rather than, as you said, from India, leave some behind. Far more regenerative by design, so that we do so coming back within the needs of the planet. This will take us towards the donut. So I've given you a whirlwind tour, and this now seems a long time ago, right? When we started with 20th century economics, that's still being taught at universities. We've traveled a long way from supply and demand, from rational economic man and the goal of growth, to an economy embedded in the living world. Humanity, pro-social humanity as part of the rest of the world, and the goal being meeting the needs of all people within the needs of a living planet. I believe this should just be, ideas like this should just be the starting point of all economics degrees that are taught today. Otherwise, we're not equipping students with the skills they need, the worldview they need, and the reality of the starting point that we are in. And I also want to pull back a moment and say, I'm talking about doughnut economics because this is the work I find myself doing, but I just want to put it into context. There are many frameworks that talk about new economics, right? There's doughnut economics or regenerative economics or well-being economy or planetary health. These are all very Western conceptions. And I just want to put them in context that many other cultures have long, they would say, what you're talking about, regenerative and distributive and balance. This sounds deeply familiar, whether it's Buen Vivir from the Andes or from Ubuntu from Southern Africa or gross national happiness from Bhutan or Heada Waora from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And there's a Maori scholar called Shane Edwards who said, this is canoe economics, right? We knew it. I love it. I think it's the most wonderful thing. So this is new economics, but this is new economics. And of course, nobody's got the fully formed answer, but I just want to acknowledge that these Western frameworks are harking to something that's been long known in other cultures. And there's a beautiful opportunity to learn together and to listen across these designs and find out how to rise and reorient and reduce together from very, very different vantage points. Okay, so that's enough theory. I'm going to pull out of that. I wrote Doughnut Economics and it came out in 2017. And it was I was trying to influence the universities. Let's change the curriculum. Probably the place where it's had the least impact in economics above it. Other subjects, yes. development studies and urban design and architecture and physics and engineering, lapped it up. Medicine, economics. But what happened really surprised me that people started using it. So people said, I love the idea, and we're going to do it. We're going to start teaching it to primary school kids in Amsterdam. We're going to start we want to make analyses of our locality through the Doughnut lens. We're going to use it as a tool in cities. We're going to use it in our community to really rethink the future of our community. We're going to use it in business. We're going to sit around a table with a donut on and ask, what does it mean for our company to bring humanity to the donut? I was blown away. People wanted to do it. So I co-founded an organization called Doughnut Economics Action Lab precisely to work with these kinds of pioneers who were just already starting to do it. Okay, what can we learn from you? How are you doing it? And what if we learn from what you're doing and share it with other teachers or what your community is doing? And how can we learn together and amplify this? So what I'm going to do is show you some examples of that being put into practice. That began in like 2019, 2020. And I want to start, I'm going to dive into the place-based work. So cities, and I said cities here, but it actually could be a town, it could be a district, it could be a rural county, places. But cities came first. Can we do the donut here? Like, could we aim to meet the needs of all of our people within the means of the planet here? What would that look like as a city project? Councillors or mayors started getting in touch with me. I was like, wow, we need to come up with a framework. So we designed a framework. I'll show you the framework, and then I'm going to show you some places that have actually been trying to do it, whether it's a local government or a community. So we unroll the donut. Let's make some space. We need some space between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling to sort of have a canvas to explore. And we asked this question. I invite you right now to think of a place, it doesn't have to be a city, a place where you feel like you belong. And think of that place through this question. How can that place you care about become a home to thriving people in a locally thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? That's a big, complex question. So we break it into what we call the four lenses, okay? And on this side, I've got the local, right? You see at the top it says local. This is the local aspirations. This is what it would look and feel like in a place. And over here are the global responsibilities. So I'm going to start here and just talk you through the four lenses. Again, think of a place that you care about. What would it look like to answer these questions in that place? So first of all, the local social lens. This is where most places actually focus. How can everybody who lives here thrive? What would it mean? I mean, what do we mean by thrive? So what's the minimum social foundation that we promise to everybody in this place? What would it mean? In terms of food, in terms of transport, housing quality, education, healthcare, access to the internet. What do we mean? And who is left below that line and how do we bring them up? So that's about local justice and local equity and how do we make sure we meet the needs of all of our local people here. Many places only really focus on that. Or we can add in an extra question, which is the local ecology. How can our city be as generous as the wildland next door? That's a very poetic question. It comes from the biomimicry thinker, if anyone knows, Janine Benyus, who was a hero of mine. And I got to collaborate with her in making this framework. So if Janine were here, she'd say, take me to the wildland next door, people. We'd say, the nearest wildland next door is Whiteham Woods on the edge of Oxford. She said, let's go. We go to Whiteham and she said, right, this is what nature shows is possible here. Nature is generous. Nature sequesters carbon. Nature stores groundwater after storm. Nature cleanses the air and the water. Nature houses biodiversity. Nature cools the air on a hot day from the treetops to the forest floor. Look what nature can do here in this valley of Oxfordshire. So can you build your cities or your agriculture in a way that aims to be as generous as nature? Can we build buildings that sequester carbon instead of releasing it? Can we make streets that absorb groundwater instead of flash flooding? Can we make streets that are cool on a hot day instead of having the urban heat island effect? That's the aspiration of this. How can we make our human habitats as ecologically generous as nature does? So this is stuff that you would feel when you're in a place. That's probably why places like Norway and Sweden think they're doing really well, because this feels great in Norway and Sweden. The air is clear, you can swim in the harbour, everyone's got the internet, the schools are good, what's not to like, okay? But then we go over here, okay, now you've got some global responsibilities too. Now we're going to ask how you're achieving this high standard of living in relation to the rest of the world. So this is where the planetary boundaries come in. How can we respect the health of the whole planet? This is the red overshoot of all high-income countries. We are in way overshoot, people. We need to come back in. So you want this nice living standard, but how are you going to come back within the needs of the planet? Or you're in a country that actually is as low and is really desperately trying to meet people's needs. How are you going to do it without going into the overshoot over there that every country before you've done? And then let's bring in the one almost no city ever have asked themselves before. How are you going to respect the health of people worldwide? I mean, you're buying food from all over the world. You're procuring materials and resources. What were the wages paid to the people who make the stuff you buy? What's the impact of climate change on people now because of our lifestyles? What is the welcome to refugees, the culture and the policy? What are the policies that we're involved in? Is our city making parts for military bombers that are going and bombing people in other countries? Is that the way we want to earn our livelihoods here? So taking seriously the interconnections. When we first did this with the city of Amsterdam, they said, no. Amsterdam is importing cocoa from West Africa where there's modern day slavery. Like, this is ugly. Don't put this in our portraits. Like, you've got used to looking at your carbon footprint. We've got to look at the human impact as well. To their credit, they turned around and spoke about it and owned it. So these are the four lenses. It's complex. It's complex. There's a lot going on here, but it doesn't go away if we ignore it. We've sat with city policymakers, and actually you find that things that people care about, it has a home here. And when your issue that you really care about, whether it's fair trade, or whether it's local food justice and food banks, or whether it's climate change, or whether it's the health of the local river, it's here. When you know that your issue is here, it's like you can breathe and look up and listen to what other people have to say too, because you know that you're seen. And we've had many policymakers say, oh, wow, I can actually think holistically around this. So it's been taken up and used in many places. And just to put it on a map, Amsterdam was the first city in 2019. In the height of COVID, they published their city portrait with a Dutch orange donut. 6 weeks later, the city of Copenhagen, another cool Euro city not wanting to be left behind, they said, well, we're going to explore what it means to live in the donut. And then there was Brussels, and then there was Barcelona. And I literally thought, is this going to be alphabetical? But no, they broke out. And now over 50 local governments, so this is municipal government around the world. Look, we're there, she said. This is municipal governments around the world that have voluntarily, with no funding coming their way, with no mandate, nobody saying, you know what? This looks like a useful framework, given the values and the vision and the ambition that we have in the world. We think we're going to pick up this framework and we're using it public. These are the ones that have gone public. There's another 50 that we're trying out quietly behind the scenes. These are the ones that have gone public. To a greater or lesser extent, the local government is experimenting with this. So I'm going to show you some. So the first is Amsterdam. We want to be a thriving, inclusive, regenerative city for all residents while respecting planetary boundaries. I mean, who doesn't want to live in a place that says that's our goal? And they started experimenting through social housing, through clothing supply chains, through food. But also a group got together and created the Amsterdam Doughnut Coalition. So civil society came together and made this coalition to start doing fantastic events. A donut deal day, saying let's get together and make new plans and projects. And they just used it as a way of energizing what they were doing. And the combination of the city government and the community has meant that over time Amsterdam has had a strong momentum in doing this work. City of Grenoble in France in 2022 was the European Green Capital of the Year, and they said, right, a child born this year will be 18 in 2040, and we commit that by the time that child is 18, this city will be well on the way to living in the donut. So they did their own calculation of the donut and compared it to the rest of France. They've done a lot of mobilization. I mean, they've done this beautiful report mobilizing and explaining to the population, this is the vision, this is where we want to be, where do you think we are, what do you think our priorities are? But as the vice mayor, the deputy mayor of Grenoble said to me, I am eco-Marxist, it makes sense. So I've been elected on an eco-social manifesto. This just makes sense. It's like adding a sail to my ship. So I'm working with it. In Cornwall, here in the UK, they took the concept and they said, we're going to make a decision-making wheel. So every infrastructural project that goes through the county council is put through this. How is it going to impact on people? How is it impacting planet? Can we change the design so it has a better impact? And then they're also measuring Cornwall's change over time. I don't even need to explain the colours to you because we get the kind of traffic-like colours of it. You can see what's getting worse, what's getting better, and what hasn't changed. And imagine if I just said to you, oh, over the last 3 years, Cornwall's GDP has gone up by 1.3%. I mean, so what? Did they employ more primary school teachers, or was there an oil spill off the coast that they had to clean up? Why? It doesn't tell you anything about what's actually the money's been paying for. This tells us in human and natural terms how life is going and how things are getting better. So we can use our eyes to read so much more information than gets crunched into a single price metric in GDP. It's much more information rich. But in Ipoh, Malaysia, an amazing change maker called Jamila Mahmood, who's one of the leading planetary health advocates, she said, I'm going to take the donut to Malaysia. And what does it look like when we do this in Malaysia? In Ipoh, our own version of it. How do we talk about it there? What does it mean to be regenerative in a middle income country? What does it mean to be distributed? How are we going to bring this to life? So there's an amazing project that they're leading there. In Saldanha Bay, in South Africa, the local government working together with society said we're going to explore it here. So these are really rich examples. These are pioneers in very different parts of the world who, in the same way that Amsterdam inspired Copenhagen, will inspire others around them. Oh, does this look useful? Could this be a useful tool for us? In Thimphu in Bhutan, the government of Bhutan got in touch, the king got in touch and said, you know, gross national happiness, we've had this concept for many, many decades. And out of everything we see coming out of Western economics, the donut makes most sense to us. So we want to use both of them in redesigning the grand master plan for the capital city of Thimphu. We want to bring them together. And I love these cartoons. It's the Bhutanese vision of what the good, safe, and just life looks like in 2047, right? And each culture is going to have its own interpretation. So it's adapted locally and made sense of. So I've shown you lots of examples, and these are all cities and local governments. If you want to actually know more about it, my colleague Leonora has worked with all these governments and put together a report which is on our, if you just wrote cities and regions, let's get started in the internet, it would pop up. But it gives you detailed case studies of all these places and how they're getting going. What we've learned in doing this work is there's nothing so powerful as peer-to-peer inspiration. When Amsterdam does it, Copenhagen wants to do it. So our role is to just learn from them. What are you doing? How are you doing it? How does it work when you're a local policymaker? Let's document that. Let's make it available to other people, and they can pick it up and start doing it too. But I also want to share with you that there are community groups that have just self-formed or existing community groups around the world saying, we're going to start doing this. We're going to have a go. What does it mean as a community group to start trying to bring this back where we are? And they create their own groups. So they don't have to have a donut name group. There can be an existing group, like there's Region Melbourne here. They're using it, or some are kind of Donut Latin America, Devon, Oxfordshire, Cheshire, and a few examples. What I love about these groups is they just get so creative. We're going to do a donut dance. We're going to make a donut pizza. We're going to write a donut magazine or some poetry or some graffiti. We're going to make a donut game. The playfulness that people bring. Because a lot of people are afraid of economics, but nobody's afraid of donuts. You might love them or hate them, but you're not afraid of them, right? So it's like, oh, this it's for me. And it means that everybody can be part of the economic conversation. It means no one is left out. In Ireland, they've created the Irish Doughnut Economics Network, connecting change makers across Ireland, using it again as a frame. In South Korea, a library in one town said, we're going to start doing this, exploring, like, so very different groups starting to explore this. What does our future look like through this lens? Melbourne, I mentioned, the folks who created Regen Melbourne said, we had terrible wildfires, then we had COVID, then we had wildfires. It was just like we're lurching from crisis to crisis. And it made us say, is there another way? Is there a different vision? And it's often after crisis that people then turn. As Milton Friedman said, the bad boy of neoliberal economics, when you know, only crisis, actual or perceived, brings about real change. And when that crisis occurs, people turn to the ideas that are lying around. So what's lying around? We want to make sure these ideas are not just lying around, we're up and running. So people can turn them. Okay, let's see it. Let's create a donut vision of Melbourne. Who can we be? Can we have a swimmable river in our city centre? What's the vision of the place we want to become? This community in Nairobi said we're going to take it and we're going to turn it into art and dance. We're going to explore what it looks like and how we make it through our own materials and our own cultural expression. And then a fantastic community not very far from here in Birmingham called Civic Square, amazing organisation doing radically transformative work at the neighbourhood scale in Birmingham. How can we go house to house and transform a street and taking down economics into life in an amazing way? I'm so indebted and impressed by what they do. And a university, the University of Lausanne, said, right, we're going to take the donut. And they created a citizens' assembly of staff and students of the university to say, what should be our vision? And how can we bring this university in the donut? I mean, look at the building, they kind of had to do it, right? But it just shows that even institutions can take it on and start doing it. And I want to talk, I'm almost closing here, institutions. Because now I want to get down to the stuff that sits underneath everything. I've been talking about the map and the compass and the designs, but what allows an organization or not to do that? So the deep design of things, what shapes the future we pursue? So I've very simplistically drawn here, right? Either we are pulled back into this world of overshoot and shortfall because we've got degenerative and divisive dynamics that are driving the world. And I think that's the world we've inherited. That's where we are. That's why the donut is in overshoot and shortfall. How can we get from there over in this space of regenerative design, of distributive design? What kind of institution can take us there? And I'm going to focus on the deep design of organizations. When I say organizations, it could be a company, it could be a university, it could be an NGO, it could be a library. Any organization has a design. So as you students, when you think about going out into the world of work, whether you go to work for an institution or a company, I invite you to be like a detective about its design, because that will tell you whether or not the institution you're thinking of joining has the capacity to be part of a future transformation. 5 design traits we need to ask ourselves. First is, what is the purpose of this institution? Why does it exist? What is it in service of in the world? If it's a company, is it in service of being, the biggest chocolate manufacturer in Europe? Well, goody for you. Or is it Tony's Chocolonely, whose mission is to end slavery in chocolate? It's not about themselves, it's about the entire industry. Right? So a mission far bigger than themselves. What is the purpose of the organization? How is it networked? Its relationships with its employees, its customers, its suppliers, its allies. How does it conduct itself in its relationships? Is it extractive? Is it collaborative? How is it governed? Who's in the room when decisions get made? Are future generations in the room? Are workers in the room? Is nature in the room? Some organizations started giving nature a place on the board. That's around governance. What are the metrics by which governance is judged? 20th century shareholder-owned corporation, every quarter, every 3 months, do we have growing sales, growing profit, growing market share? Not a lot of room for transformation if you're held that tightly to shareholder maximization. Well, didn't mean to do that. Ownership. How is this organization owned? And here, this is really important in business. Is this company owned by its employees? Is it owned by a family for 300 years? Is it owned by its founding 2 entrepreneurs? Is it owned by venture capital or shareholders or the state? It's really going to make a difference to how it's governed. And then what sits at the bottom, right? The tail that wags the dog. What's underneath all of this? Finance. How is this organization financed? Again, companies. Where's the finance coming from? And what is it expecting? What does it want to extract? And what is it reinvesting in purpose? So if I speak to companies, if you have a shareholder-owned company, it's owned by the shareholders, the finance comes from their investment in the shares, and it's governed to maximize shareholder returns. They're continually extracting the dividend every quarter, and if you don't get it, they sell. That creates a machine that's there to maximize return on capital. It's the heart of a capitalist society. I don't see any room in that design to serve a purpose, which is to be regenerative and distributed by design. You're caught between 2 very different goals. So I believe that if we are going to have businesses that are going to take us towards this, we need a very different design of business that is either steward-owned or employee-owned, deeply redesigning its structure to enable it to actually pursue purpose. That goes off into a whole other conversation. We can come back to that. Okay, and then we can ask ourselves, what must we stop doing, let go of, and leave behind in our own deep design of organization, and what can we start doing and spread and amplify? And so we invite organizations, when we started working with city councils, they said, wow, this idea of getting into Doughnut and doing this portrait, it's really challenging. And we started doing workshops with them to look at the deep design of their own organization. What do you wish we could let go of and leave behind? And what do we actually want to take forward? And you could see people saying, but we never get to talk about this. This is sort of the deep system that's just off the table and out of topic, but let's talk about it, because if we're stuck in deep systems that don't serve us, we won't be able to go where we want to go. We've also done many of these workshops with companies, with people who are doing startups. If you care about creating an amazing new technology for a solar revolution, you really care about the design of your technology, you better care about the design of your company as well. Otherwise, you'll just be eaten by venture capital within a few months and turned into another profit maximizer and take the edges off the intention you ever had. So I'm going to pull back out. I'm going to go back here. Everything I've said is in service of this redirection. It's about the mindset that we are taught, what we learn to see and center, and what is left peripheral, invisible, making those things visible. Through presenting some of these ideas of Doughnut economics, I'm trying to make visible things that I think matter if we're going to give ourselves even half a chance in the 21st century to start reorienting in these directions. If we want today's students, whether they're studying economics or whether they're bathed in the world of economics, as we all are, to actually have a chance to reorient our economies in this direction. And let me just pull out by saying, a couple of years ago, I ran a course. I got so fed up of always being invited in at the end of the semester saying, oh gosh, we were not taught what we wanted to be taught. Could you come and sort of give a catch-up lecture? So I hosted something called Doughnut Economics Live here in Oxford. And we just looked at all these deep designs, and it's all online. So if anyone's interested, I've just put all the slide decks, I've increased them. There's loads of readings and videos, and anyone can learn from them or teach from them. Again, putting everything in the commons so that we can start doing this kind of education. So it's doughnut-economics.org/university courses. It's all there. All these slides are there as well, but I'll make all of these available to all of you. Let me stop here by saying that if any of you are interested in the actual practice that communities are doing, businesses doing, educators, cities, towns, we do all of this at Doughnut Economics Action Lab. Anyone can browse the website or join. There are tools, there are stories. For me, I'm finding that the institutions of universities aren't leading in bringing these ideas at the heart of the curriculum. So I'm hanging out with the practitioners who are just getting on and doing it. I profoundly believe that 21st century economics is going to be practiced first and theorized later. So we learn from the practitioners of how they try and make change happen, even though they are embedded in systems. You know, anyone in a city, well, they're in a country that's got rules in a region that's part of a global financial and economic system that's against what they're trying to do, and yet they start, and yet they begin. Because that's how change will always happen. We just begin and come up against resistance and see where we can go. So with that, I'll stop. I really look forward to having some conversation. I can dive into other topics. I'll stop there. Thanks very much. And maybe before we dive into questions, just do you want to spend 2 minutes talking to the person next to you, what's interesting, before we just take one question time? Just 2 minutes. Great. By you. Yeah. And you don't have to ask a question. You know, if you've got a view or a suggestion, you can be welcome to my book.
Everyone, I'll bring you the microphone.
Oh, it's
Start. You're right here.
It's perfect. It's meant to be. Well, that was absolutely brilliant. I've known about you for many years, but I've never actually been to one of your presentations. And I'm hoping you'll put it out on YouTube so I can share it with my followers. I think it'd be hugely powerful. What I would throw into that mix, obviously you're trying to reform within a toxic system. So my work focuses on steering us into a non-direction. So folks can find my website. My name's Barbara Williams and my website is Poems for Parliament. And I'm suggesting we should have a global aspiration to get back within the carrying capacity of our planet, within the ecological boundaries of the planet. It has to be a global aspiration because however thoroughly you try to stay within the boundaries of your own little locality, if everybody else is wasting resources, we won't achieve it. So if you want to sign the petition for a global aspiration to shrink our GDP and shrink our population until we get back within the boundaries of the planet, you can find me on Poems for Parliament. Thank you.
Hi, well, thank you very much for your presentation. I really loved everything about it. And well, I saw my city and I was really surprised it was there.
You saw where?
My city,
What's your city?
Santiago de Cali in Colombia. So I'm really looking forward to read which government did it and well, what's going on with that. But one question I had is, well, my city in particular is a city with a lot of security issues. So I'm just trying to think how could this framework be thought of also from a security, human security aspect and well also state security because well Colombia right now Venezuela was invaded by United States. So yeah, I mean and I saw on the map that Colombia is not that bad, we're not far from Costa Rica.
Yeah.
So if we are on that path, what if let's say United States goes crazy and tries to do the same they did to Venezuela? I don't think that's gonna happen, but I mean, what if? And do we have this framework? Do we have power? And how we can think of this framework, thinking of those aspects as well.
Thinking of how do we think of this framework? Thinking of the power.
And security.
Great question. Let me just go back to here. Oh, where has it gone? There. Right. Great question. So, without diving into this, let's just recognize that every framework makes some things visible. So it's useful for seeing some things and other things aren't there. That's why it's a framework. We make choices. I really like your point. And actually, as I was showing this earlier, when I was first showing it to you, and I was just thinking, the world, there's the US, and it's kind of the same size as Canada, and it's kind of the same size as Australia on the map here. China's in it. But if you could layer on top of this, and I'd love it if somebody said, right, I'm going to draw on top of this a geopolitical lens. Because show this to a child who doesn't know about geopolitics. You can't see which countries are really powerful here, right? Because that's not the information it's bringing out. But what you're saying is, hang on, there's some really powerful countries, the US in relation to, say, Venezuela, in relation to Colombia and others, and Costa Rica, actually. What would it look like to layer on top of it a geopolitical reality? It's not visible. So I take this almost like a base map. If I take the arrows off, I think of this as a base map. There's so many things I would love to make visible. I would love to make more visible the relations between countries. I've had a go doing it, say, France, has nuclear power. It gets its uranium from a mine in Niger, and you could we tell stories across this? And now I'm talking about just economic storytelling. How could we bring out the complex realities of the world through things like this? So my answer is, I don't know the answer to that, but I really like the point you're saying. Where can we make power visible? It's not visible here. What would it mean could this be a useful way to start making power more visible in relation to countries' positions? I don't know, but I think it's a really, really important point. Because I'm saying, what this map is saying is it's judging countries where they are and saying they should reduce. I mean, maybe some of you are sitting here thinking, well, the US should reduce, but is it going to? No. So nice dream. I mean, nice dream, right? But there's a value in saying, if we care about an equitable justice in the world, where should we be heading? And let's still argue and make the case for it, even if it doesn't feel like the geopolitics of the world is listening to it. But I'm still going to make the case for it. Some people need to do that, and some people need to be totally focused on the geopolitical realities and how do we deal with where we are, not where we wish we were heading. And what would it look like to try and map those together? Do you want to respond, or does that make you think anything?
I'd like to see you work on that. I definitely think that economics is the basis for power. So I feel like there's a lot of room to work it. So we're really interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd try to think about it.
Yeah. If anybody wants to try doing that, please go for it. It would be brilliant to see.
Wonderful. I'm going to quickly ask an online question just to get everybody involved. So this question is from an anonymous user, but they've asked with relation to the SDGs and the new consensus among UN member states for a renewed agenda in 2030. Do you envision how do you envision the new goals to be set? And do you think the donut will have got any traction sort of in those international spheres?
That's an interesting question. I'm trying to find a donut. There's a donut. Right. So I first drew this diagram, this image in 2012, before the SDGs existed. So when I first filled in the center of it, it was in the run up to the Rio +20 conference, which was in June 2012 in Rio, and it was a UN conference on sustainable development, I think. And I drew the donut. I didn't know how to fill the center in. And somebody gave me a brilliant idea. He said, look, all the countries of the world are submitting reports to the Rio conference on what they think should be the next agenda. So I went through all 86 reports that nations and regions had submitted, and I read every single social priority that they named. I underlined them and made a mega table before the days of Excel, before I knew how to use Excel. Mega piece of paper, and put in the center of the donut all the social priorities that have been mentioned by more than half the country. And I was told that the creation of the SDGs came out of that conference. And I was told by people in 2015, when they were negotiating the SDGs, people who were in the final negotiation said to me, we had the donut on the table next to us. Because when UN negotiators go into negotiations, they can get very caught in, deleting words and moving the comma and moving the clause. And somebody said, no, we have a responsibility to keep a big vision, and we should be moving towards this. So I was really honored that the donut was on the table as they were negotiating the SDGs. And then when the SDGs came out, I used the social priorities of the SDGs to recreate the center of the donut. So that they're cousin concepts, they've influenced each other. So, and the reason I use the SDGs is not because they're perfect. They talk about gender equality, they don't talk about racial equality, right? They're not perfect. The reason I use them is because I was invited to present the donut at the UN actually in when was it? In 2012, I think, and the UN General Assembly. So I'm standing there and I'm going, well, whose values are these? Dear member states, they're yours. I crowdsourced them from you, as opposed to I got them from Amartya Sen, or I made them up at Oxfam, or they're mine, or they're yours. They're yours. So that's the reason I use them. Is like I'm just crowdsourcing what the world's already agreed. So I hope that the donut has some. You know what I really hope? What I would care about most is not any specific word, it's that we could start moving away from the idea that progress has this shape to progress has this shape, to coming back within. And I think it's the metaphorical flip that any of us who've been raised on a Western mindset, which is actually many of us, because Western education is exported around the world, it's the mindset shift that we need to make. And the opportunities that we, as I said earlier, we understand it within our bodies. We get it. We get it that our health lies in balance. And we go, growth is good and the economy will grow. Well, if your friend goes to the doctor and the doctor tells her she has a growth, right? I mean, right, you're laughing because it's kind of nervous laughter. We immediately know that's not good. We understand it in our bodies. The growth, endless growth within a delicately balanced, complex living whole, which is a human body, is not good. Yeah, growth of a child is good. A child grows and then they grow up and they stop growing. I have these twins, those little babies I have. They're now 17 years old. They grew 2 inches a year. Literally, we marked it on the wall. It's like, wow, 2 inches, 2 inches. They've stopped, thank God, because otherwise they couldn't fit in the door. They're all taller than me. Both taller than me. That sounds like I'm overwhelmed by my children. They're both taller than me, so I'm the smallest member of the family except for the cat. I wasn't expecting that. But they've stopped growing. They literally couldn't sit at my table if they kept growing 2 inches. They would not belong. Things would not belong on this planet, in our planetary home, if they grow endlessly. Take anything of anything you love, anyone or anything you love, and imagine it growing exponentially 3% a year. It will be monstrous, literally. You don't want it to grow endlessly, you want it to belong. So if the UN next goals had the shape of a donut, have you noticed they have the little badges, they have the SDGs in a little donut shape? I was like, subtle influence. But moving to that and moving away from endless growth. And of course, growth was written into the SDGs. SDG 8, I think, is decent work and growth. And if it can be taken out, because it's not a goal, it's a means along the way.
There are a few, we could rename them the sustainable degrowth goals until we get within the, and then we can call them sustainable development.
You could use that framing.
Thank you. I'm going to go around here to be fair to everybody around the room.
Hi, thank you very much for the wonderful insights. It's been really, I do really appreciate it. I wanted to ask, and by no chance am I trying to take that stance, by the way, this stance of what I'm going to say, but you would have encountered and interacted countless of members of people who would have said, especially from the developing world, who saying that why is it our fault, or why is it our ability now to follow this? Why can't we have the same level of economic growth as the rest of the industrialized nations? How did perhaps you navigate that to perhaps convince them, especially political leaders, because oftentimes, I come from India, oftentimes the political leaders and their voices do not represent the will of the people. So, and there's obviously two different gaps of it. So how did you navigate, engaging with those kind of actors and trying to, tell them, yes, economic growth, etc., the old school, yeah, it's not really as fair as what it once was, but this is perhaps a better approach?
It's a great question. Oh, here we are. Yeah, let me go back here. So I believe, so what I'm advocating for is a world in which we can meet the needs of all people within the means of the planet. If we got there, and if every country and the lower, I'm going to call them lower income countries, because the kind of developing thing is not working for me, but if lower income countries did that, first of all, this would be a miraculously better world than we have, right? So actually the donut as a concept centers the interests of people who are deprived in low income countries. It shows them, they are what shows up in it, right? They're all the red in the middle, they're what's visible. The well-being of the middle classes of global north are not visible. It shows you the people who don't have. So it's, if anyone knows theories of justice, John Rawls' theory of justice, right? You focus on the worst. I mean, the donut is, in a way, is a Rawlsian justice. You act in the interest of those who are worst off. So it highlights the people in deprivation and it highlights ecological ownership. So a world in which we met the donut would be, this is a radically different world than the one we had. Let me say the second thing that personally, as a white British woman, middle class woman who went to Oxford University, I'm one chromosome away from the full set of dominance right here. So I focus on talking to countries of the global north, the places I belong. I don't try and persuade or tell governments or peoples of other countries what they should do. and so when I focus on transformation, I will focus on high income countries because it's where I belong. And I worked in Zanzibar for 3 years and I loved it, but I eventually realized I want to live in a country where my voice is equal to only to everybody else because I belong there, not because I'm an expat. So it led me to move back here and advocate within my country. But there's a really fair question, if I can take your question and reframe it slightly. So the rise arrow, you might notice it subtly comes out a bit. It doesn't say go straight up. It doesn't say no overshoot. It goes out a bit and then comes back in. And in a way, I could reframe your question of like, well, how far could that arrow go out? I mean, if we're saying ultimately that all countries should live within the donut, then including low-income countries should ultimately live in the donut. But on the way there, how much right do we have to go out before we come back in? And that I think is a really fair, powerful question. And it's right. So that you could draw that arrow right at Botswana, sitting way out there. I mean, let's hope that not everybody has to go all the way out to where Botswana is to come back in. Because there are large populations here. Again, this doesn't represent the population size. There is a lot of people there. And so actually that would be a huge weight on the planet if we go all the way out before we come back. If we go all the way out to where Bolivia is before we come back in, this will also help shoot us well over planetary boundaries. So how bendy can that arrow be? And I think a lot of the answer is here. Well, if I were one of these countries saying, if you want us to rise up on such a slender bend, it's back to our friend from Brazil, then you folks in high-income countries, you need to make that possible for us. You need to make it possible for us to leapfrog these technologies, for us to have incredible regenerative agriculture and distributed energy systems. And thank God for the solar energy is the best form of energy going forwards. So that's on your side, but you've got to make this feasible for us to do this now. And the thing I find very difficult about this moment is the direction that the geopolitics of this moment is going is saying, we're not paying attention to this. We're right. America is not saying, oh, we now our friend from America said there's this like visceral, what do you say, become a visceral reaction against, oh no, this is a threat to our freedom. I don't want to see that. Because actually this is a very, very heavy demand upon us. We don't want to know. And then takes us back to geopolitics. It's like, well, what if we just ignore you? So the geopolitics of making that happen is really, really tough. Personally, I'm going to come back. So what I find energizing is to work with people in places, and there are people in all of these places saying, we're just going to get started because actually we believe it. We don't want to go over that overshoot. We have colleagues and friends say, actually we're really proud of the path that we can take. We're not going to do, you Westerners, look how profitable, look how extractive, and we don't want to copy that. We're going to be proud and show you a very different way. So working with that energy and seeing what's possible there. That's what personally I feel comfortable with. Do you want to say something in response?
Yeah, I mean, everything made sense. But the last point was actually quite powerful. I grew up in Singapore. I'm from the south of India. We have a lot of small local community farmers, groups, ways across Southeast Asia, only basically doing this, but there's small pockets. So that's why I mentioned earlier, there is a divide between political leaders and the will of the people. So I'm glad you raised that last one as well, because it's not as if like those exist and it's important to recognize that and kind of create a ripple effect where it can spread around. So no, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
First, you can go along the road.
Thank you so much for the talk. It was a very interesting talk. So I just have a short question that when we see the donut, it has a social aspect and the environmental aspect. But how do we take in account the genuine, unavoidable trade-offs? Like we need to tackle the issue of poverty as well as take into account the 1.5 degree consensus that has been made globally. How do we account for that?
And I think here the question is there a genuine trade-off? Like we just have to choose, either we get people out of poverty or we stay within 1.5 degrees. Is that the case? Or is there, not wiggle room, but like, is there another direction up? So sometimes people say boundaries unleash creativity, they unleash possibility. Maybe we have to think totally different in another direction. And the argument I'm making is actually we need to go for regenerative and distributed design, and to make that possible, it's going to come back to your point, it's going to be a deeply redistribution. We could absolutely meet the needs of all people within the means of this planet. I fully believe that. We're 8 billion, 12, 15 billion, that's getting hard. 8 billion, I believe we could. I mean, we can look at food in the world, right? We know that around 30% of food that's produced is lost or wasted in post-harvest, in supply chains, or straight from plates in kitchens. And yet the amount of food needed to end hunger is a fraction of that. So even if you just take the food supply, there is enough food in the world to feed everybody, but the way it's distributed and used and valued or disvalued means we don't get there. So it's a radical redistribution, but we don't have the geopolitics in place to enable that at the moment. So I don't think I'm not happy to say there's a genuine trade-off there, because it's not feasible. It is feasible, but there's a deep politics that would need to change to make that possible. But I think there's a deep design shift. If we move to regenerative design, where we use things again, where we change our mind about what it means to reuse and refurbish and love something and repair it. Like these boots, right? I've had these boots for a long time and the zips completely went, and I took them to the cobbler and said, it's going to cost me 60 quid to put new zips in. And probably, I don't want to pay 60 quid for new zips. And I thought, you know what, I love these boots. Well, I don't need a new pair of boots. I'm sorry, I'm just giving a very simple, little local example. But it's like, what makes us flip from thinking, those boots are broken, to actually, I'll pay 60 quid to have new zips put in my boots because they're good enough, they work. And how do we change that mindset? Because then we don't have the same trade-offs that we think we're inevitably facing. There are deep inequalities that we've got used to that actually are being challenged. There's a wonderful book called Libertarianism by a Dutch academic called Ingrid Robbins, which is how much money is enough. And she argues that $1 million should be maximum enough. Okay, 10 million is completely the maximum. But she makes a brilliant ethical case for 10 million being the maximum that anybody should own, and that the rest should be absolutely redistributed. And if you think about other cultures, there have been, potlatches, there are things redistributed, burnt. I mean, other cultures have had ways of offsetting a very strong reinforcing feedback loop of money begets money and power begets power. And we've become used in this culture to think we don't get in the way of it. I think there can be radically different policies brought into play in the world. It is possible. It is possible. So I don't want to go down the route of it's a genuine trade-off. I think there are other ways of making it possible. I'm going to stand for that.
Hi, thank you for this very interesting lecture. Well, it's quite insightful. I have one question. These cities that are already taking up on this planetary boundary as Amsterdam, Copenhagen, so they still work in a capital market that's highly unequal and like all these downsides that you were mentioning. How do you actually break out of this? Because I also don't see that Amsterdam wants to break out of this capital market system. So I'm kind of just not sure how this should work. We can implement, say, try to get there, but like this will still work in a capital market, even though like people don't want. How do you take both into account?
Great point. So, like I've said, these are the places that are getting started, even though Amsterdam City Council is operating within the nation of Amsterdam, which the nation of the Netherlands, which has all sorts of national laws, which is within Europe, which has regional laws within the global financial capitalist system. So we're trying to change something that you're inevitably going to bang into the existing system. Absolutely. And even just within Amsterdam City Council or any city council, it's not a homogeneous thing. There are many departments and politics between departments and people within the as in a university. It's not Oxford University isn't one thing. There are different departments and politics within. And so there's many change makers, and it comes down to people. And the beginning of it, it's someone who just says, I'm just going to get this thing going. Thank God for people who just pioneer things, even though if you stood back rationally and said, can I get all the way? I mean, no, you never get all the way there because you're embedded in capitalism. You're not going to get all the way. And yet people still get up and go, I'm going to start trying. I'm determined to start trying. So they're starting to try. And what I'm showing you is places and people starting to try. And they bang into the system. Amsterdam set itself the goal in 2019. They said by 2030, this city will be free of fossil fuel, cars and boats. I don't know if they're going to make it. because that's their goal, but they are contained within Dutch regulation that might say, well, you're not allowed to run ahead of the nation because there's a national rules. You create anti-competitive practice if one city runs it. You run into all sorts of things, and yet people start. People start setting up companies that will that company succeed and displace the major corporation? Maybe not, but people still start. I don't know how else change happens. I don't know where else it comes from. But what we see is politicians will only stand, I see, politicians will only stand for an agenda when they know that there's a constituency that will support it. So you need practitioners and people starting to stand for something to make it feasible for whether it's a city politics or European. The European Union started getting very interested in doughnut economics. So like some of our most famous cities are doing this thing with a donut. What is going on? We started being invited to the European Union. Can you come and explain? And how is it now feeding into European story? They start talking about living well within planetary boundaries. By the way, within is a really radical word. If you hear policymakers saying within, right? It's not endless growth, it's bounded. So they are still within, as you say, capital markets, or the incentives and the drives and the forces of a wider capitalist system, or within national regulations. This is an experiment. This is an attempt to make change happen. There's not a natural, easy pathway there. What would you say in reply?
Yeah, I would agree with you. Just like, do you then have to change the whole not like parts of the capital system? Because if I'm a company, I'm like fully sustainable, and
I want to meet your company. You're a company that's fully sustainable. Let's go.
Okay, I don't have a company. But really, like it doesn't like it both helps to the social foundation as well as like not overshooting the boundary. Would that still be allowed in this system? Because
would it still be allowed?
Yeah, would it still work in this system? Because if you want to then destroy the whole, destroy really, but
Evolve.
Okay, but how does it? Even companies that want to take over the, I think using this planetary boundary and like doughnut economics thing, how do they evolve if they don't exist anymore as a company?
Well, I think they can exist as a company, but if you're telling me, I mean, I know you're imagining a company that is helping to meet the needs of people, getting people out of deprivation and being more distributed, and helping bring us back within planetary boundaries, that's either a very rare shareholder and profit maximizing company that's like, wow, I want to meet that company, or it's more like Fairphone, or Tony's Chocolonely, or Patagonia, which are companies that are steward-owned or mission-driven. They have a mission log. They're designed differently. So going back to those 5 designs, they're designed differently so that they can actually keep pursuing the good that they are set up to do while making profits. They're making profits, right? If you're not making profits, you're not going to be a company anymore. You're going to be bankrupt. Companies need to make profits to employ to open the doors next week and next month and next year. The question is, are they maximizing profits, or are they making sufficient profits to be a vehicle of business with a goal in the world? And for me, that's the evolution in the deep design of a business. And that's what I find really exciting about seeing companies like Patagonia becoming steward-owned, so that the decision-making and the way it's governed is not to maximize profits, it's to pursue our goal, making a profit so that we stay in business, and driving the returns into the value of our goal. So it's a big, deeper and longer conversation, but I believe that we can evolve businesses so that they can be vehicles of 21st century regeneration and distribution, but not under the design we've inherited from 20th century corporations.
Thank you so much. Incredible. I have a question which is should be asked to so many ideas. So it's not this idea has a different, unique problem, but what stories do you see as those that will convince not only the people who are bought in like us or the deep opponents, but the general public at large needs to change its perception, its imagination of what is possible and desirable? And how do you see that happening?
Right. So that was how do you make this compelling to people? Yeah. So first of all, I gave that quote from Milton Friedman, and I'll say it again actually, because I think it's really powerful. In the 1960s, so he was the sort of father of neoliberal economics, and in the 40s, he had a project to make neoliberalism the next system. Spoiler, he won, right? It worked. By 1980, Reagan and Thatcher come into power and neoliberalism is the way. Milton Friedman says, only a crisis, actual or perceived, brings about change. When that change happens, people turn to the ideas that are lying around at the time. And he said, this is our function right now, is to make, to develop the alternatives, make them available and accessible, and until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. And what I find so compelling is that he saw neoliberalism as politically impossible in the 60s, right? So that can give us heart, because we think it's politically impossible to get away from it. Milton Friedman, So what did he do? He wanted to make sure that ideas were lying around. So number one, for me, I don't want these ideas of doughnut economics only to be lying around. We want them up and running. As I gave that example from Melbourne, wildfires, COVID, wildfires. What then can we do? Do people go into freeze? Do they go into fortress, fortress anywhere, build high gates around me and just protect me and mine? Or do they say, is there a different way? And we're trying to make the practice of doughnut economics around the world. It's very English, keep calm and carry on. It's like, look, there are governments that voluntarily, from Ipoh in Malaysia to Salhana Bay in South Africa, to Copenhagen, to Oxfordshire, they've just chosen out of their own interest to pick this up and start trying to do this. They can't go all the way because they're in a bigger system, but you know what? They're just getting going. Normal, sensible civil servants just getting on with it. There's something very compelling about that. And then the community groups and the playfulness of that. For me, it's really important to make this irresistible. So we make it very colourful and fun, and we invite people to play with the idea and turn it into their own local food. And it's a simit in Turkey, and it's a ciambella in Italy, and it's a vadu in India, and people are playful with it, because also we need to be able to use our humour and laugh in the face of such challenges. Otherwise, it's really depressing and people leave. So for me, the biggest, the most important thing, right at the very beginning, I said I used to work for Oxfam, and I got really fed up with sort of knocking on the door of the system, of the big companies, and they're like, thank you, dear, for your passion, for your NGO passion. Now come back when you have a business case. Like, I'm not doing that anymore. So for me, the momentum is to say, I'm not going to try and come over to you and beg you to listen to me anymore. I'm standing here on my own carpet, right? And it's donut chip carpet. And there's lots of people here now, and there's cities and places and communities and business saying, yeah, of course we're doing this makes sense. So that we have our own standing here. And then I'll speak to business. It says, oh, we like it. Please, I invite you, dear company, come over here and explain how you belong in this future. We invite you. So it's shifting the onus of persuasion. Now I'm not talking about the public, but I'm talking about the people in power. I invite you. This is now becoming credible, because I can show you a map. And even when I showed you the map, I can hear this, oh, like people think, oh, it's just Amsterdam. Oh my goodness, look, oh, it's my town. It has an impact on us when we see that people are starting to do it. I show you the photos. It's different from looking at theory. Wow. We are highly influenced by our peers, peer-to-peer inspiration, but also peer-to-peer permission to move, to go. Wow, are people like me actually starting to do this? So that's, for me, the valuable thing of showing this practice. And it's about other people. Look, how they're doing it. Are they having fun? And making it irresistible and making it sensible. It's grounded. It's quite hard to argue against, like, what's not to like about this? Okay, the geopolitics. But none of us like the geopolitics. We don't like the motivation that people are doing that. How can the reasonable people with pro-sociality stand and keep that pro-sociality and not be cowed by the violent individualism that we see in those who are running our geopolitics? How do we stand strong in our pro-sociality and say, no, I'm going to stand for this, and I don't know where it leads, and I'm here not because I'm saying it's probable, but because it's possible. I'm going to stand for that. That's, for me, what keeps me doing it. And also the inspiration, just the number of people who come up and say, I'm doing this, I've invented a game, or it's just phenomenal, the number of people who want to pick an idea up and run with it.
I'm going to be cheeky.
Oh,
one more question,
okay.
if that's okay. I think one of the things that inspired me most by your talk comes from the Doughnut Action Lab is all of the visioning work that is done. And also, the other thing that kind of came to my mind was the difference between the kind of culture shift that you were talking about, and maybe some of the culture shifts that we're, maybe not shift, but the culture that we're seeing coming up around AI and all that stuff that's happening. So I guess my question is there any exciting visioning that you've heard of or maybe you started thinking about in your own brain, about how AI could be distributive and regenerative? Or is that too much to ask given the kind of systems of power that it's based already?
Ooh, shall we end on a big AI? Okay.
Might as well. It's kind of on brand.
Yeah, okay.
This period of human history.
I can imagine many ways in which AI could contribute to a far more distributed future. AI pupil-specific education in schools around the world. Every student would have their own maths teacher, their own language teacher. It could be phenomenal, right? Amazing. Immediately, obviously possible. I see my own daughter teaching herself using AI, so she can do it. Kids around the world could have that. Amazing. Healthcare, just personalized, so many things. It could be phenomenal. I'm sure AI could be brilliant at regenerative things, logistics optimization, minimizing energy use, designing systems. It could be done for so many things. So I don't think there's any shortage of the possibility of showing examples of how AI could do really, really great things that could both be regenerative and distributive. There's a huge, I'm just going to jump to my top level concern about AI, which is, again, going back to the deep design of how its purpose, networks, government, owned and financed. And the major corporations that are developing it are realizing that the first to get to artificial general intelligence will take all. And therefore, the one thing you have to do is race. And you put aside all the guardrails and you can't slow down to take care of risks. You've got to get there first. Because you don't get there first, even if it's bad, somebody else will get there first and they'll dominate you. So the most important thing is not to be dominated by others. So that it's like supercharged rational economic man. I need to be the one in control, even if what I make is horrible. At least it was me who made it. That's what I'm hearing, and I'm very influenced by people like Tristan Harris, Asa Raskin, who talk about this. There's an amazing new film about to come out called The AI Dilemma that talks about this. I fear the human loss of control over AI because of the way that humans are racing to design it, and that we are designing it with no guards on, and therefore it will control beyond us and actually optimize for AI, and AI might say to itself, actually, a warmer world is quite good for us, so let's for our own thriving. So not intending to hurt the humans, but just, sorry, the temperature that we need is not the temperature that you need. So that's not a very nice place to end. So I'm very concerned about the macro race of AI rather than focusing on the really nice things that it could do along the way. So I don't want to end there, but I think having a big vision of the world that we want is one that meets human needs within the means of all of the needs of the living planet, centers life. And I want to keep centering life and not get whipped up by the thrill and excitement of all the speed at which AI is developing. I keep asking myself, is this in service of life? And it's not being developed in service of life.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I mean, that is the one thing at the end is just the point of in service of life.
Yeah.
And the fact that there are models out there that aren't, that are focused on that, I think is wonderful.
Yes.
A huge round of applause, please.
My apologies to anybody online that I didn't stand within the camera, because I just really hate standing behind boxes. Like, why do we design teaching spaces with a big box between us? So.
Yes, and all of you after Hospital of Climate Change, please do keep in touch with what's going on with Climate Society. And for you who are on Hospital of Climate Change, we'll feel
welcome to Shed's Slide.
That's me.
You're welcome.